Well, welcome back. This is the beginning of session 6, and we're glad that you're with us again. And, I asked you at the last session if you're a little freaked out, and Kay reminded me that's probably not a good question to ask you. And she's right, because, I don't want to paint too dark a picture, because when we have a diagnosis, a cure is possible. When we have definitions, we are able to move from point A to point B. I get lost in malls all the time. Kay has a GPS in her. I have not figured out how she has it yet. We come out of a store and bam, I'm lost. I'm heading in the wrong direction. I'm okay on the freeway, but inside I'm not. And it always helps when I find the little map that says X marks the spot, you are here. Because I know then where I can go to get out of the mall or go to where I want to go. So let me back up and say, again, be encouraged, because it is with a diagnosis that we have formulas for getting us into a place of growth. Kate, talk to us a little bit about the vacillator child.
Okay, vacillator kids, I think, are probably born with a level of sensitivity. I think that's part of their temperament. And I do think that they probably have a higher need for connection than some other types. I think that's probably inborn. They are incredibly in tune with, are you with them, are you present, or are you not? And so you may think you're spending time with your kid, but they may not feel like you're really present and connected with them. So, oftentimes these kids are called the drama queen, or, this is the high need kid, or, this is the intense kid who always wants something and it's never enough. And these kids will kind of get in your face more than the other types. And so they usually cause more stress for a parent, because the avoider is often, their room reading, and the pleaser is just doing something nice to try and win you back. And the vacillator is usually stirring up the pot in the family. And so these kids may even exaggerate something to get your attention. So sometimes this drama part of them is just, well, maybe if I get loud enough or demanding enough, someone will come and give me what I want or need. So vacillator children tend to be highly reactive even as kids. Now, an introverted vacillator may be reactive by just withdrawing and going through a long period of silence. But the more extroverted ones will certainly let you know when they're not happy. And they seem to need time and attention when you're most unable to give it. It's almost like a test. Oh, you're walking out the door to go have a date together. Well, this is when I really want you. And, so they may put up a fuss when, you and your spouse are leaving to go somewhere, because they are sort of testing, well, how important am I? So they can be challenging for a parent, because you feel like you're dealing with a kid where the feeling is it's just never enough.
Yeah, what happens is that oftentimes this child is also very anxious about closeness and distance. And when they don't feel as though they're being seen, or if something has frightened them, they'll often press in to get the parent's attention. And they themselves don't have the emotional wherewithal necessarily to be able to say, I'm really scared or anxious, or I was really caught off guard today and very alarmed, so I need to come to you. No, what they'll do is they'll push themselves onto the parent in sort of a immature cry of pain. They'll be perhaps obnoxious, they'll be pushy, they'll be insistent, they'll create a scene, and so what happens? Well, they end up, the parent gets irritated. And so the parent gets irritated and they push them away. They go, what's the matter with you? And they don't like that. And it can be, as Kay said, at inopportune times. And so this is the vacillator child, and what they do is they crave attention and attentiveness. And when they become a teenager, they can actually, if it's a female, they can turn that into sexual attentiveness. And oftentimes they so crave attentiveness that they will dress provocatively, and they will seek the attention of males, because they're really looking much for somebody to pay attention to them and not avert their gaze. So this is the vacillator child, And the goal to help them grow. I taught a dad who had a girl who was a vacillator. And I taught a dad who was an avoider to sit down with her every day and to do a backwards inquiry about the day. Not how was your day, but what's the strongest feeling that came up inside of you today? And then what caused it? What was the happiest feeling that came up in you today? And then what caused it? What was the scariest feeling that came up today? And then what caused it? And he would focus his attention on that daughter for 15, 20 minutes a day. And this girl, over a period of several months, became a different young lady because she was getting very focused attention from her dad, who previously and heretofore had given her no attention because he was put off by this, coming toward him with this cry for help.
Yeah, often a vacillator kid, if there's a parent who will go toe-to-toe with them, they'd rather be engaged in an intense argument than not engaged at all. Mm-hmm. And so we have a friend that's got a vacillator daughter, and he said, what I'm learning is that it doesn't matter over what. We could be engaged over the dumbest thing, but as long as we're engaged, she's happy. And it could be a huge fight, but she's feeling connected even if we're in a yelling match. And, one of the growth goals for the vacillator as the parent is you've got to remain the parent and don't engage with a yelling child. Vacillators need two things. They need that really focused presence of a parent, but they also need boundaries that are immovable and consistent, because inconsistent boundaries drive this kid crazy, and they do push. So it's very hard to have consistent boundaries with this kid. But to be able to say to them, I really want to hear what you're feeling. I know you're upset. I will be glad to listen when you calm down, and we can have a normal talk. Well, I can't wait. You need to talk to me now. When you're calm, we'll have a talk. Well, I can't wait. I got to go, and you don't love me. You don't even care about me. I knew it. When you're calm, I'd be glad to listen. Over and over. Do not engage. Do not get hooked. They're great at hooking you. These are often kids who everybody loves outside the home. You get all these compliments. You have the greatest kid. They are so fun. They're so they just are so interesting. They're so smart. And you're thinking, is this the same kid? Because at home, you just see a different picture. They demand something from a parent that they don't necessarily demand from other people. So it can be a challenge, but one of the rules of thumb is do not engage with a yelling kid. Have a calm talk.
And to really ask questions that are non-obvious at the moment. Like if they're making an issue and a scene about something over here, ask the non-obvious question. Something has scared you or hurt you or frightened you on the inside, has made you agitated and anxious. So pick a feeling off the feelings word list. And by the way, the feeling word list and the parent toolbox is in the back of your syllabus for you to use. And it's there for you to use. And we're going to teach you how to use it in the last session. But really, it's to learn to contain all that. If you give them boundaries and limits, and then if you say, I will talk to you, and you sit down and you give them a focused attention, what you're doing is to give you a metaphor, it's like you're swaddling them like the flailing baby. You take a brand new baby born and you put them on their back, unwrapped, and they flail, okay? You ever know what I'm talking about? And you take a baby and you swaddle them and you create containment. What happens is they settle right down. And a lot of times the vacillator child, the pleaser child especially, they flail inside. The pleaser will mask it and smile, and they won't tell you. They'll just go into compulsive caregiving to make it go away. The vacillator doesn't try and mask a thing. They demand what they want, and they want it now. And your goal is to contain that and help them from the flailing.
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things to do with a vacillator kid is to listen to what you don't agree with.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And to keep on listening.
Mm-hmm.
Because the vacillator will say things in exaggerated ways. Well, you love my brother, but you hate me. And the tendency is to go, oh, come on. I can't believe you're saying that. Last week we did this, this, and this for you. Instead of saying, wow, that's a really powerful feeling. I'd like to hear more about that. Well, you, da, 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 da. So you really feel like your brother is the favorite and you're not. Wow, that would be hard to live with. Tell me more. And that kind of interaction settles these kids because you can keep listening even if you don't agree. You might be in your head saying that they forget this, this, and this, and this. And you know what? Probably they did at the moment. Because they only live in the moment. What am I getting in this moment? They don't care what I got yesterday or the day before. It's all about this moment. So certainly as they get older, you want to help them see that some of their feelings and moods are exaggerated, but they actually feel it that intensely inside. And it's hard for parents to understand because they don't feel things that intensely. So this kid really needs to be listened to and explored, even if you disagree. And that can do a lot to calm them back down.
And what this does is this helps them emotionally regulate. If they perhaps got a little bit away from you in childhood and as an adolescent or as a child, they're struggling with emotional regulation. That's what you're trying to do. And one of the things I do with adults and kids in my office is I give them a little brain lesson, which is what's happening right now when you're in this highly intense stage is your brain is flooded. What does that mean? The right brain, which is the more emotional side, it flares into a state of activity that takes the whole brain on a stampede. See? And the left brain, which is logic, analysis, linear thinking, the ability to put language to it, goes offline. Kind of goes into a sleep mode. So when you try to and you try to debate them at that particular point in time, linear thinking, logic, it doesn't work because the left brain is offline. So what I tell them to do when you're flooded, and I'll even make my kids do this, or other kids or other adults in my office, all right, I want you to stop just a timeout. I want you to take 5 deep breaths. I mean, slow, deep breaths. And I teach them to manage, and after we take 5 deep breaths, we'll finish this conversation. I give them a carrot at the end of the 5 deep breaths. We will come back. I won't forget you. I'll stay right here with you. Let's do it together. And when we take 5 deep breaths, what happens is we find out from biological, neurological studies that the left brain, the flooding begins to diminish and the left brain starts to come up online. I'm now able to talk and put words to what I'm feeling inside. And it gives us a chance to begin to do what you're saying, to talk about those feelings and those feeling states that feel like a wild horse stampede across the prairies.
Right.
Prairie. Well.
Anything else for the vacillator? Let's see.
Vacillators are some of my favorite people in the whole world. They grow up, they can be some of the best therapists I've ever seen. Why? Because they're not afraid of anger, they're not afraid of negative emotions. Pleasers and avoiders are afraid of negative emotions, and they tend to approach counseling in a very let's keep everything safe mode. Vacillators are willing to roll up their sleeves and dig right in and discuss some of the messiness. So some of my favorite people are vacillators because they are charming, they are fun, and I'm not afraid of their anger, and I know how to lean into it so it doesn't get too far out of control. But I had to learn that. Last thing I thought I'd ever want to do is hang out with vacillators. As a kid who grew up with one who had no awareness and was completely out of control. And now that's what I do for a living. How ironic God is at times.
Mm-hmm. That's a great example of how he can take something difficult and use it for good.
Yes, God.
You know, I mean, your home was good and bad, and that was one of the bad things, but God used it for good.
Yep.
So.
Well, let's talk about the chaotic controller kids. And
I want to say one more thing about the vacillator chop.
Do that.
They tend to communicate indirectly. They will show you their feelings versus speaking about their feelings, and it's usually anger that they're stuck on. So to say something to them like, I can tell you're really upset, and I know there's a lot more going on inside you than just anger. So go get that feeling word list and let's see what's under all that anger. Is an invitation for them to learn to put words to what is going on inside of them instead of just acting it out. But these kids often show their stress by getting reactive and more demanding, which tends to push people away, which just intensifies the cycle. Does that make sense?
And with that, to even remind them, I can't read your mind. Your behavior tells me something's wrong, but you know what? I can't read your mind. When you were 2, I had to guess. Now I can ask. And guess what? Your spouse isn't going to be able to read your mind. Your kids aren't going to be able. And you set a picture for the future. Nobody can read your mind. So let's start talking. And then that is even a reminder to help them begin to grow up and think forward and just get out of the present. Because you said a moment ago, they're so stuck in the present.
I also came across a great website there's a therapy called dialectical behavior therapy. And there's if you Google that and put self-help, you will come up with several websites that have some great tools that you can use with your vacillator kid in lucid moments, not when they're in one of their highly reactive states, but it actually walks them through certain, okay, what happened? What were your assumptions? They tend to go to awful places in their head about, I can't decide what to wear today, and now none of my friends are going to like me because I'm going to look so stupid, and they're way out there in where they go with their thinking. So that might be a good resource too, if you feel like you have an older child that can work through that in a calmer moment.
So it's a real tension because you don't want to engage in a yelling match with your vacillator kid, but you also don't want to give them the brush off like you're pushing them away, because both of those will inflame them. You need to find that good middle ground, and you need to contain yourself in such a way that you're able to stay with them and just say, I see you, we will talk, and we will talk when these certain things happen. You go to the refrigerator and you find words, et cetera, et cetera. Because both of those extremes, as parents, really keep the child highly provoked.
Right.
We've learned the hard way sometimes with people. As a pastor, as friends, et cetera, as a counselors, we found out those things the hard way. Well, should we move on to the chaotic controller victim child? Why don't you begin?
Okay. A lot of times you're going to see these kids in foreign adoptions, especially if you got them later. They had a couple years in the foreign country. You may see them in situations where you're adopting a kid out of the foster system. You may see this when there is trauma outside the home that you don't know about. We have several friends that were sexually abused as kids for years and their parents never knew it outside the home. So there was a lot of trauma for them, but it wasn't actually coming from inside the home, other than there wasn't a real safe place in that home to bring, painful feelings. And then in some cases, if you grew up in a really difficult home, perhaps, you're going to see signs of this in your own kids if you're having a really difficult time. But some of the, these kids will use everything they can to self-soothe because they have found people unreliable. So they may rock. I have a client who put himself to sleep every night by literally rocking like this in bed and, moving the whole bed while he was doing it. But that's the only way he could calm himself to go to sleep. You may have a lot of anger in these kids. You already see that victim controller, one going this way and perhaps another going that way. A lot of them have eating problems and digestive problems because eating wasn't a pleasant thing, or they didn't have enough food. They made hide food or hoard food if they came from backgrounds where they didn't have enough. And there is no trust in these kids, and that's what makes it so hard, because especially as Christians with adoption, we think, well, I'm just going to love them, it's all going to be great. And it's like, we know, it's not that easy, because those early years, they didn't have that formation inside and implicit memories that they're really loved and valued and cared for. It was just the opposite. And so they're very distrusting. They may have a very manipulative side where they can be very precocious and very charming to get what they want, but then they'll turn. Lying, stealing, in some cases where they've really had a lot of trauma. You may have them threatening family members. We worked on Skype with a missionary in China who took in a kid that had been severely abused, and he was 9. And at first he was just charming and would sit on the dad's lap, and they said, oh, he's going to do wonderful here. And I had a Skype session with him, and I said, okay, here's what's going to come up. I just want you to be prepared. And literally within 2 weeks, this kid flip-flopped, and he was threatening to kill their own children, He was looking for knives in the kitchen. I mean, in extreme cases, it can be that bad.
He would get up when they were asleep.
He would get up with it, so they had to actually lock him in his room at night because they were afraid for their own children. So, you know, attachment injuries can be very, very severe. And when they go out to the severe edge, there's actually a diagnosis called reactive attachment disorder. And these kids can be helped, but it's a very slow process. It takes an enormous amount of patience, and it takes a constant reminder in yourself that these behaviors come out of injuries. These are not bad kids. The behaviors they do come from the deep injuries that they've experienced when they were little, and it's a lot for them to overcome. But I've seen it happen.
Kate, talk a little bit about a very unpleasant topic, but it's increasingly more prevalent and people are more aware of cutting. Why do kids do that? They're more likely going to come out of the chaotic home.
Or perhaps a very strong vacillator may do cutting. But cutting is, you know, where you self-injure. Usually it's done with a razor blade, and kids cut their arms or their legs, usually places at first where parents won't notice. And there's two reasons major. I'm going to just generalize here. One is it makes internal pain external. It's like they can't really put words to all the horrible feelings inside them, but when they see that cut and they see that blood, it's like there's an injury there. It's an injury that's visible. It's an injury that they can see. It's an injury they can put words to. The other reason is there's a big endorphin release when this behavior happens. And so it's actually very calming because of the endorphin release. And so it can get kind of addictive because it actually, even though it may be painful, the endorphins kick in to overcome that pain. And it actually serves a purpose for relief.
Now I got a question.
Yeah.
We've never articulated this before, but it's a form of repair of rupture, isn't it?
Yeah, it is kind of.
Because it creates relief.
It does create relief.
So they sort of get some resolution and closure.
And it creates a visibility of, and you know, a lot of parents don't take their kids into therapy until they're starving themselves or they're cutting or whatever, and the symptoms are more severe, and then they're like, oh my gosh, something's really wrong. And there is something really wrong, but the good part of that is, you know, if you can admit that there is a problem, then you can get help and you can start working on the problem.
You know, another way you're going to see these kids is in the outreach of your church. You reach out into this community, and guess what you're going to get? You're going to reach these chaotic homes, and some of the kids that are going to come into your youth group, your Sunday school classes, are going to, and some of the parents that come in are going to be highly chaotic, controlling, and disorganized, or victim-like, and they wear a big V on their chest, and it's take advantage of me. You can do anything you want. I won't resist. I don't have an adult voice, and I can't push back. I'm not assertive. And
and sometimes you don't see the results right away. I was reading an article by Lauren Slater. I don't know if you've ever heard of her, but she was raised in a horribly abusive home. And from the age 14 to 24, she was in and out of psychiatric hospitals, many attempts to commit suicide, lots of cutting. Her mom gave her to the foster system when she was 14. And she had a foster family, she said, that just consistently loved me. And she said, I couldn't believe it every time they took me back after I came out of a hospital. And she says, I was a hard kid. But every time I get ready to be discharged, and I just was waiting for them to say, well, we can't do this. But they were there, and they were just consistent. And she said, it really took me into my late 20s to heal to the point where I could have a normal life. But when I look back, they were really a big part of it. And at the time, they didn't feel like they were a big part of anything, those parents. They just thought they were babysitting a kid that was never going to get well. So she's got some incredible writing that really helps you understand what it's like to live inside a body that's been abused like she was.
We've seen a lot of pleasers and vacillator moms. Those are the two moms that tend to want to adopt kids. They love the baby stage so much. And if they're pleasers and vacillators, I should say, they will tend to want to adopt once they stop having their own children. And what happens is they remember the very familiar, close, intense feelings they had with their own biological child as they nursed the child and cared for the child, and the child's adoring gaze back into their eyes. And that's very intoxicating to those moms. and then all of a sudden they adopt a child, and the child does not give them back what their biological child gave them. So all of a sudden, part of the reasons why they adopted, to create that closeness and a craving they desire, is all of a sudden thwarted. And I've seen, we actually were working with a family where the vacillator mom was so dysregulated herself by this adopted child who was from a chaotic background, they ended up giving the child back. She couldn't carry through with it. It was so disrupted. She became dysregulated. The whole family became so dysregulated because what she was thinking she was going to get, a biological child experience, was not. Because a lot of this chaos starts even in the womb. A lot of these children grow up in these dangerous homes, or homes where the parents are in substance abuse, violence, sexual behaviors, all kinds of chaos. Well, the child develops, the gestation of the child in the womb. The child is used to what? Because they're in this symbiotic relationship and the bloodstreams are connected, the child gets used to high levels of adrenaline, high levels of cortisol, and the child is agitated even in the womb. And so what we're trying to say here, not all kids are created equal from the get-go, and they require special attention. And how do you help these people? And the way you help these children is you sit down and you really, the same thing you do with the adult, you work very hard on creating empathy. And it's easy to get mad at these kids because they come at you aggressively, or they have no personhood, and so you can disrespect the person who is a pushover, or you can be angry at the hostile kid. But all hostility ultimately, when you face hostility and lean into it and you talk about the pain underneath, breakthroughs are possible and connection is possible. The great movie that with Robin Williams, Good Will Hunting, yeah, where he was working with this brilliant kid who was also angry and had a very hostile growing up, right, and chaotic. And when he connected with him is when he got underneath the anger, and could get the guy, Matt Damon, to really feel his emotional feelings, in which at the end of the movie you see him driving off into freedom, and you see Robin Williams content, and there was a bond between those two people. It's a beautiful story.
Yeah, it takes a long time to create any kind of bond with someone who's been that injured really young. But there's varying degrees. I mean, some kids weather it better than others just by temperament, difficult situations. But it's a big job to take on this type of kid. There's a great book by Karen Purvis called The Connected Child. She works with a lot of foreign adoptions. And, you know, these kids already have so much fear inside. And so you have to learn to relate to them without adding to that fear. And that's a challenge. You know, how do you discipline these kids without creating more fear and more distrust is some of her specialty. So I would encourage you to get that if you have this
That's in our bibliography at the end of your syllabus.
Yeah.
So helping the chaotic child, if you have a victim child, some of the things you need to do with the victim child is to help them learn to develop a voice. And this again, Kay, is where feeling wordless, the ability to identify what you're feeling inside, beginning to verbalize it. There are many people that come into my office, male and female, as adults, who have no adult voice. They cannot tell you, especially if intimidated, what they are feeling. They instantaneously, with any kind of emotional distress, become little inside. This is why we call the vacillator the childlike parent. And
so the victim
is the childlike parent. And they stay childlike. And so to develop that voice, to develop assertiveness is really a challenge. But the beginning is, again, to put words to what you feel on the inside and to be able to listen to them and then to be able to empathize, love, and connect. And then the ability for that victim child to be able to say no, create boundaries, to practice, to role play. I was just thinking as we role played there for a minute, you and me, how much we role played with our kids throughout all their lives. We'd have them practice with friends, dates, all kinds of scenarios. We just role play for a few minutes in the car. And our kids got used to verbalizing because they'd verbalized with us. So they were able to take it into their social settings and be able to practice. But we had to wade in, roll up our sleeves, and go to some tricky places
Right.
and unpleasant places from time to time. Is there anything else you'd say about the victim or the controller child, Kate, to help them? Got to deal with the addictions, huh? A lot of them start addictions.
Again, the parents, if they're creating the chaos, of course the growth has to start there. If you've just got a kid from another country, or you're not creating the chaos, it's just patience, patience, patience. And getting help, get professional help, and talk to people who have already gotten professional help so you don't go to all the wrong places. Because you have to really understand attachment disorders and the severe ones, and to get good help. You can get bad help, a lot of bad help out there. Okay, let's just take 4 minutes and do the extrovert introvert.
All right, we can do that.
Okay, no matter if you have an avoider, pleaser, vacillator, controller, victim, or even a secure connector, you can have an extroverted kid or an introverted kid. And I am curious, if we define extrovert introvert like this, what you are. But let's define it how Myers-Briggs defines it. Introverts are people who enjoy people, they like being around people, but that wears them out. And they need alone time to kind of recharge their batteries and gain energy again to go back out and be with people. So you could have a pastor who's very connected to his congregation, but at the end of a Sunday morning, he's got to go have alone time. An extroverted pastor might be able to go out to lunch with everybody, and that would be even more energizing. So extroverts are energized by people. When they're worn out, they actually want connection as a way of energizing. Introverts are worn out, and they need alone and downtime to recharge. So how many of you think you're an introvert? Hey, a good number. That's higher than normal. How many of you that raised your hand, because I would say there was a good 40 or 50 people, feel like your parents really knew you on the inside? You can say you felt you were deeply known and understood by your parents. Raise your hand really high. If you're an introvert.
One hand.
1 out of 40. 2 out of 40.
Wow.
Okay, now wake up if you have an introverted child, because we find this consistently, that about 1% of an audience will have an introvert who felt known and seen. And the reason for that is you have to pursue the introverted child. They will not wear their feelings on their sleeve. They will not tell you what they're thinking. They get interrupted at the dinner table all the time. If they do start to talk, the extroverts will interrupt. And so many times they just learn it's not even worth fighting for a piece of the conversation. And so the introverted kid needs to be pursued. One of our kids out of 4 is an introvert. And you just can't pursue him any old time. You have to look for those windows of time where he's in a talkative mood. You can test the waters, but sometimes you're just like, no, there's no way we're going to have a conversation today. And then there's other times where it's like he's in a talkative mood, and those are the times I really initiate conversations into his life, even as an adult. So the introverted kid, when you ask them a question, they will think, they will stop, they will not answer at first. And so many times I was working with a dad who had a very introverted son, and he was very extroverted. They couldn't have been more opposite on this temperament trait. And he would ask his son a question in front of me, and within 15 seconds, he would start giving a multiple choice. Well, is it this? Is it that? Do you think it's that? Do you think it's this? And I kept telling the dad, hush. Let him, give him time. Introverts process on the inside. They're thinking the words and deciding what they want to say before they ever say them. Extroverts process as they talk. It's like, oh yeah, now I get why I feel like that. So finally, this kid took literally sometimes 2 to 3 minutes before he would answer. But when he answered, he was so articulate and had such deep insights and such deep, complex answers for his dad that I think his dad was very shocked. I don't think he'd ever been able to take the time to really wait for this kid to process inwardly first so that he could really go in a deeper place.
It's kind of like the marshmallow test, isn't it? The dad couldn't wait.
Right.
Couldn't tolerate the tension and couldn't delay his gratification. He had to start providing multiple answers for the kid. Introverts are 25% of the population. That's 1/4 of us. And yet they're monopolized and drowned out by the 3/4 who are extroverts. And so often at a dinner table, because they're outnumbered, they often will not, they'll just give up over time. They realize what my thoughts were, I'm still thinking about topic number one. It doesn't mean they're slow or they're not smart. It just means they're thoughtful. And they like to process internally. Now, K, this is not to be confused with, would you close and make a distinction between the introvert and the avoider? They're not to be confused. You happen to be both. Ruh-roh for me. Anyhow, but talk about how they're slightly different. You can have avoiders that are extroverts.
Yes, if you have an avoider and an introvert, it's just going to take even a little more work. When we were first learning to process feelings, he would ask me a question, and I was just like, at first I was blank inside, like, ooh, I have no idea. And then looking at the feeling wordless would prompt some things. And then it seems like it would just take me forever to try and find words to describe whatever it was I was trying to describe. So it takes a lot of patience to get an extroverted, and they need a quiet spot. They're not going to have a conversation in the room with the TV on and the brothers and sisters mulling around. You got to take them out and take them for dinner, or go buy them a Coke, or do something where you're one-on-one and you can really have the space and the time and a lower amount of chaos and noise, because introverts need some quiet to do that kind of processing. And they're observers. These are the kids, you take them to a birthday party and they just sit, or they just stand there and watch, and the parents are like, go play, and they're just watching. They don't want to go play. And the extroverted parent is like, what's wrong? Go on, there's a bounce house, go play. Well, they need to observe first.
How long will Reese observe? 15 minutes, 20 minutes?
Sometimes. We have an introverted grandson. He's adorable. But we really understand that he's an introvert. And when he goes places, he'll just sit and watch for a while. And he'll decide, after he watches for a while, what he wants to do or who he wants to play with. And there's times where he will talk your ear off, and there's times where he is not the least bit interested in talking to you. And so instead of pushing at those times or getting our feelings hurt, we're like, well, he's an introvert. This just isn't a time where he feels like connecting. So you have to be a little more patient about right timing with an introvert. But they really do want to be known. And if you say to the introvert, well, we'll have a great talk tomorrow night, and then you never initiate again, they're very hurt, because they really believe your words and they count on them. And sometimes extroverts are like, well, bye, I'll call you tomorrow. Or, well, we'll talk tomorrow night. And then the extrovert never gets back around to doing that. And the introvert's like, wow, I was really counting on that. But will they tell you? No. They'll just chalk it up as one more time they didn't get listened to.
All right. This is the end of session.